Hello students, how are you? Tonight I'm going to be talking a little bit about David Schneider's article, The Belief Machine, under the subheadings of critical thinking and psychology. So before I get into this a little bit, I want to talk about this article, how I came across this article. Because this may not seem like the kind of article you'd see in a public administration or public affairs type of course, but I assure you it's a really great article. And it's actually probably one of the few times I'll really discuss critical thinking in deep perspective, because I don't think you guys get enough critical thinking advice. So if you allow me, I want to talk to you guys about this. Now, it's a little bit long, but it's a good article to read. And the reason why I came across it is because David Schneider was actually one of my professors when I was at Rice University for my second Master's of Liberal Studies. And David Schneider was someone that I was very fond of and still am. I haven't talked to him in several years. He retired from Rice very soon after I graduated. And David Schneider was probably one of the unusual professors that we had at Rice. And unusual in the sense that he was an unusually humble guy, which unfortunately in academia many times you find people who are a little bit arrogant and they're a little bit snobby and they can be a tad bit standoffish. So David Schneider was not like that. He told us a story one time in school, in class, where he said actually he had come from UT San Antonio and he had gotten the job at Rice in the psychology department. And he said, actually I wasn't going to get this job. I wasn't even in the running for the job. But it just so happened that there was somebody at UT San Antonio who was offered the job, initially accepted it, and then they changed their mind, they didn't want to take the job. So Rice came looking for another psychology professor. And it just so happened that it was David Schneider. And so he said, yes, I'll take the job. So not many people are that forthright. Most of the professors in the program at Rice were fairly standoffish. They were a little bit snooty. And they had come from much better universities than I graduated from. And they expected you to know that. And if you didn't know that, they were going to tell you that. David Schneider was not like that. And he was a trained psychologist. He wrote a great book about stereotyping, which you can look up and find. But the gist of why I wanted to speak to you about this is because oftentimes professors don't take the time to inform the students as to why this article came about in their lives. How did they come across it? What was the reason for it? Oftentimes professors also don't really make the effort to try to explain why this article is important. So the reason why I like talking about this article, The Belief Machine, is because we all have these beliefs. And it's these beliefs that actually inhibit us in many ways. These beliefs also prevent us sometimes from doing our jobs properly or your schoolwork. We think we are very rational people, but oftentimes we are not. We operate on instinct. We operate on emotions. So that's something that the belief machine is going to talk about. And I have some other examples regarding critical thinking that I will discuss as we get through the article. So let me begin. The article in brief explores how human minds automatically form beliefs from raw data. We all get this data that comes in and we immediately think, hey, this must be the right one. This data is the correct one. And data is just data. Data is not information. Data takes it in. We take in data, raw data. We process it. That becomes information. Maybe sometimes, hopefully, it becomes real, actual knowledge, real world knowledge, or book knowledge, which is theoretical knowledge. That's also okay. But we often take in this raw data. And we assume that whatever that raw data is, we take in beliefs immediately. And we often make many mistakes thinking that. And there's plenty of examples the article talks about. So it's okay to have these beliefs. You believe in God. That's okay. There is no logical evidence behind any of that. But that's okay. You have a belief in that. That belief, however, sometimes can get people into trouble. They think, well, I'm going to walk off this bridge and God will catch me. That's not really how it works. But some people really believe that. The faith is so strong. That belief, unfortunately, may not translate into real world protections. You will fall to your death if you walk off a 50-foot bridge, for example, right? Or you'll get pretty badly hurt. So it's very helpful. It's natural. It's our instincts, how we evolved as a species. But the beliefs also can get into a lot of trouble. So we encounter information, we believe it, we look at it where it's like it's a mental shortcut. that, I'm going to go outside the house and I'll see that the leaves are green. And so it may be summertime, maybe spring. It's not fall because the leaves are still brown. We have a mental picture in our brains. We see a door with a room with a light on. We assume, well, somebody must be inside that room. The light is on. Maybe, but maybe not. Maybe someone forgot to turn the light off. There are four main sources which validate our beliefs that you should consider when you read this article. One, of course, is personal experiences. People base their beliefs many times on personal experiences. I had a horrible time at that store, XYZ. I'm not going back there. It's personal experience. Everybody's horrible at that store. Cultural influences. Well, these people in this category of this culture, XYZ, they behave in this manner. You know who these guys are. These are those people. Logical deductions. We try to make logical deductions. If I, for example, pick up this pen and I drop it, it's going to fall. Well, of course, that's gravity. Logical deduction. Gravity pulls it down. And of course, emotional needs. Emotional needs is probably the trickiest one, where we feel as though, well, I have these emotional needs. If I say I love you to somebody, my spouse or my girlfriend or boyfriend, they will also say I love you back. That may or may not be true, but it's a belief we have. Those same kind of sources can produce false or anomalous beliefs when they're relied upon without proper checks. So science provides tools for testing and validating beliefs systematically, and the false beliefs can have very serious consequence for individuals and society. So, for example, human minds, when they process information into beliefs, you put raw data into the proper slot, and out pops out belief. That's generally how it is. I mentioned, for example, the leaves are outside my house, they turn brown, it pops into my head, oh, it must be fall, because leaves change color in fall. That's probably true. 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, they believe everything at face value. 2 plus 3 equals chair. That must be true, right, Timmy? That's not really true, Timmy, but you believe it because you're 3. As an adult, we would not believe that. Their ideas are mental content that we take to be true or accurate. They can range from factual claims to personal opinions, which are self-centered by nature, because all of us are very self-centered, selfish people. We are survival mechanism-oriented species, right? Everything's about survival. How do I earn my bread today? How do I take care of my family? How do I pay the mortgage? How do I prevent myself from falling asleep listening to Dr. Nair? All those are kind of beliefs that you have to have, right? I know someone's paying attention. As I mentioned, of course, the personal experience, you have direct observation, interaction, cultural effects, deductions from other beliefs, and emotions and motives. Many times, when we rely on experience, is where it gets a little bit more interesting. We are very parochial and limited. What that means is we only see parts of reality. And very often, we will only see what we want to believe. We will put aside other things. And we all do this. It's an unconscious way that we try to make sense of the world. That we say, okay, I see this, and so that validates my belief that this must be true, X, Y, Z. That may or may not really be true, actually. Oftentimes, single events get too much weight. One dramatic experience can override the patterns. So you could go to a store, you have a very good experience many times, but there's that one time you go to the store, you have a horrible experience, and you're like, you know what, I'm never going back to the store ever again. Even though it was a one-time experience, but my personal beliefs tell me this is not a great place for me to go to, so I'm not going to go there. And very often that's what happens. There are also ideas where we have these patterns, and they have random events which seem meaningful, but they have really no bearing at all. They're just patterns. We look for these patterns. And so we think, like I mentioned about the leaves turning brown, we look for these patterns. We see rain outside, and instinctively we think there's going to be thunder and lightning. There's patterns. That's not necessarily true. That is sometimes true, and sometimes it's not true. They don't always go together. But because we've evolved as a species to look for patterns, to protect ourselves from predators and from other undesirables, we don't want to get killed by a leopard or lion in the forest. We look for those beliefs, actually. The experiences then are filtered because we shape what we see. If we believe some professor will treat us badly or a student will be rude to a professor based on maybe a previous bad incident, then it shapes that. And so every time we have an interaction with whatever it is, there's always going to be a problem where we see this is a filtered way that we're looking at this experience. And lastly, of course, the interpretation required, which means that some same events can support different beliefs. culture obviously shapes beliefs, and of course, when you have a culture, it has a restricted menu of limited options of, intellectual thinking options. Saying that all Indian people like myself, we really like spicy food. Well, that is a stereotypical belief, but it is also true. We do like spicy food, so I guess there is that, But yes, hey, that's just how it is. We have other ways where, for example, social support can validate false beliefs. So people living in a certain community, when other newcomers move in, if they have a certain ethnic group or cultural group, the old people in the neighborhood, the previous occupants, will have other preconceived notions or beliefs about them. Is that really true? Well, in the case of Indian people, we do like spicy food, so there is that. There it is, spicy food. So there's, of course, witchcraft fears, UFO abductions, conspiracy theories, which is discussed in the article. Conspiracy theories is one of my favorites, actually, because a good example is, of course, the moon landing. The moon landing was completely fake. And despite what people will want to keep insisting on, I mean, with all the evidence that it really could not have been faked, it would have actually been much harder to do in 1969 than to do it today. But people still believe that. They really cannot believe that people actually walked on the moon. Some people really believe that. They cling to that. Or that Elvis is still alive. All other kinds of, the Freemasons control all of America. XYZ culture does this. There's so many different beliefs that people have with conspiracy theories. That JFK was not assassinated. Adolf Hitler is still alive and well in South America. All kinds of beliefs that people believe, and these are conspiracy theories. But they're not, they have no real basis, actually. It's just a story. It's a fairy tale, basically. But our beliefs, often influenced by our prejudices towards XYZ group, they form those conspiracy theories to a large extent. And to be honest with you, and I think probably most students know this, conspiracy theories are kind of fun, actually, right? It is fun to believe in UFOs, that there could be these little green aliens that live on this planet, or they live, far away. That is part of the fun in our lives. Our brains are naturally very inquisitive and creative. So there is something to be said about that. I would like to believe in ET or other aliens. I would like to believe in, Men in Black. I would like to believe in that. I do not believe they actually exist. But it would be interesting to hear about that. Now, of course, people only use about 10% of their brain. I'm sure some students have heard this, that actually 90% of your brain is never really used. And of course, in that sense, that's where a lot of the times our creative thinking capacity doesn't come into play. Years ago, there was a story of nonprofit working in Africa. And they had a very special situation where they wanted to give baby incubators to small villages in the darkest parts of Africa to prevent when preemie babies, preborn babies which were not, they were not healthy enough to survive without being in a baby incubator. Most students probably know what I'm referring to. They were trying to figure out a way to give these villages these incubators, baby incubators. And they donated them. And the incubators would work fine for a few months, a year and a half, and then they would break down. Because, of course, sometimes electricity was not always working, parts break down, the wear and usage, and then the villagers would come and talk to the nonprofit and say, we need you to replace this part is broken down. They would come over, they would look at the incubator, they would see what part it is, they would go order it, but of course it would take several months for the part to come over. Meantime, a baby or two babies might die in that time. So the nonprofit became a little tired of this. And so what they did was they approached a consulting firm and they said, look, this is the unique problem we have. We have to find a better way to not let these machines break down as often. The consulting company said, we will send out some consultants and we'll give you our advice. So they did. They went out, they looked at everything. They did interviews, they observed how the villagers were living, and they came back a few weeks later and they presented a report. And their report was this. We get it that you have these baby incubator machines, and these machines do break down from time to time. Then you have to order the part, and the part could take months to get over. So your problem really is the parts. But we did observe that all these parts of Africa, there's all these Range Rovers and Land Rovers, Toyota Cruisers, all these 4x4, these heavy-duty, SUVs and vans running around. Obviously, the villagers know what they're doing. So why don't you contracted an engineering firm, a design firm, to make a baby incubator machine with just car parts. That way, when a part breaks down, the villagers can be educated and informed which part they can pull out from an SUV to use for that baby incubator machine. And then it won't be a big deal for them to go get spare parts for the cars. So that type of critical thinking is not something that comes along easily. It took a long time for them to figure out exactly what they were looking at. Very often, and the article discusses this, we often try to go in circles. You know, the problem that happens, and we approach the problem with the same mindset that basically created the problem. Albert Einstein had a very famous quote about solving problems. And for those of you who take my class later down the road, I do discuss an article that I use for several classes called Are You Solving the Right Problem? And in that article, they discuss how to solve problems. There's an 8-step process for that. Albert Einstein was given a quote in the article where he discussed that if I were to save the world, and I had 1 hour to save the world somehow, I would spend 59 minutes examining what the problem is and 1 minute solving the problem. Because that's all you really need. But the examination and the critical thinking involved and the creative thinking involved to figure out how to solve the problem, that is where students who are good versus the great students are separated. Because you can figure out exactly what you're looking at. And the example I gave before about the baby incubator machines, the consultants had to come in from the outside. And that is another thing that the article also discusses. That if you are on the inside of that bubble, and you're always doing things the way that's always been done, at TSU or other places, you will come in with the mindset that you want to fix this problem the way it is. But the reality is the problem cannot be fixed because the problem was created by the same people who are inside that bubble. You have to go outside to find the answer. And many times people may not want to do that because consultants are expensive. People sometimes are very arrogant. They don't think they can fix the problem. They think they can fix the problem on their own. They don't need anybody else's help. And so the problem doesn't really get fixed. But if you truly want to fix the problem, you have to go outside, actually. Last couple of things I want to discuss. They are personal belief decisions. Many times personal decisions are made, which we all do, but they're based on false beliefs. For example, people might say, you know, European cars, they break down way more than Japanese cars. Hence, Japanese cars are more reliable. Hence, I should buy a Japanese car. That is partially true, but that is not entirely true. My brother-in-law, who works in engineering and he designs hybrid engines, insists that BMW and Audi and Porsche or Porsche, whichever term you want to use, these are actually very reliable machines. The Germans make amazing machines and amazing cars, but they do require a lot of maintenance, which most people don't want to do. And so in that case, they are not that reliable. They are very high performance, and if you've ever driven a BMW or a Porsche, you know this. But they are also high maintenance. So my question to him was, well, why don't you just make a car that is both high performance and low maintenance? And he said, you do have that. You have Lexus. Lexus can do that. So it is a way you can look at it, but those cars are not reliable. They just do require a lot of maintenance. And most people don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. Hence why I drive a Mitsubishi. I drive a Japanese car. I have no interest in taking and sitting for 3 hours at a BMW or Porsche dealership, getting my car worked over every 5 months. But people are okay with that. Death penalty effectiveness in criminal justice policy. This is what I want to also discuss over here. There's also, many times, people think, for example, death penalty, that their public policy is guided by incorrect assumptions. For example, people may know this, on average, if someone is convicted of death penalty, they have an automatic appeal to the next court. So if you're convicted here in Houston in district court, you have an automatic appeal to the next state level court of appeals. And then of course people will keep appealing. So on average, somebody sits on death row for 17 years. That's the average time someone sits on death row. Well, someone sits on death row for 17 years, either they're pardoned by that time, they're set free, they're exonerated, or they're executed. What possible punishment was effected? Where was the justice exactly? So, but people believe that, the death penalty, but the death penalty takes a longer time. For example, in Miami, years ago, there was a study that showed that if a prosecutor wanted to go for the death penalty, they had to spend $3 million on a trial for all the evidence and all this. And this figure is from 20 years ago. If they just want to go for a murder charge, for a lifetime behind bars, it would actually be about $500,000. Is that a big difference in price? Yeah, it's a huge difference. Because the prosecutor has to get 12 people to really believe they're going to flip the switch. They're going to execute this person. And I don't mean that in a glib way. Florida, where I'm from originally, it is very proud of its electric chair, nicknamed Old Sparky. So that is something that people did not think about, unfortunately. Now, every decision is a bet based on beliefs. And every decision, of course, is a bet. You're making a bet. You look outside, the sky is clear, but the weather announcer says, it's going to rain today in about 2 hours. You know what, I can take my chances. But it did rain, and you did get wet. But you based your chances on false beliefs. I can take my chances. Now, the last thing I want to take away from this is our natural tendency to form beliefs is both helpful and dangerous. And by that I mean we can have these good beliefs that, for example, after 9/11, for example, I was living in D.C. when 9/11 happened, and the whole city changed after that. After 9/11, for example, when I would go through airports for about a year, maybe 2 years, some people may remember this, there was a group of National Guards. National Guard was all over the place, and they'd walk around there in their military fatigues. They had assault rifles. I can't remember which model of the gun they would have, but they walk around, and people would feel very safe, But the reality is that's sort of like a false belief. See, you're safe on the ground. There's no terrorist that's going to attack the airport on the ground. The terrorist is going to attack the airplane, which is in the air, where there are no National Guardsmen guarding you. They are air marshals, of course, but they are no National Guardsmen. But people had this belief in their head. It was a false belief. And I remember seeing them walk around thinking, I don't really feel that much safe, actually. I think this is a false belief. But people believe that. And people believe what they want to believe, of course. There's multiple sources of validation which are better than one. So, for example, another story, which is not mentioned in the article, but I can share with you, is years and years ago, a Harvard Business Review article talked about ethics and how unethical people can become when they are sort of like inside a group or outside a group. So, for example, they talk about, in the article they mentioned there was this African-American female judge who grew very discouraged and very depressed one day after seeing so many young black men come through a court. And she had to keep sentencing them for robbery, homicide, whatever it was. And then she would look at them and she would see her own people in this category of young black men. She grew very depressed and discouraged and thought about quitting the bench. And then one of her friends, when she talked to one of her friends suggested to her, maybe you are sort of in a bubble. Maybe you are in a bubble. Maybe you are not being challenged by your belief. Your belief is all black men commit crimes. But maybe you are not challenging yourself. Maybe what you need to do is you need to go to another part of the city and you need to look at the demographics in that city of either Hispanic or Asian or white, and you need to go and observe the court over there and see who those defendants are. So she thought about that, and that seemed like a good idea. So she approached one of her colleagues who was a white middle-aged judge in a different section of the city and talked to her and asked her if she could come and observe for a few days. And of course there was no problem, because most courts you can walk in and observe. It's open to the public. She did. Big surprise. Students may understand what I'm going to discuss. She realized when she sat in that court with the white judge's court that almost all of the defendants that she saw in that courtroom were all white. All white men and women for robbery, homicide, and all the other stuff. And so what she realized was it was the neighborhood, actually, that made the difference. The location was what made the difference in terms of how her perspective, her worldview was formed, was being based on a false set of beliefs. Because someone could walk in and say, well, according to this courtroom, only white people commit crimes. These are the people who are being incarcerated and they're being locked up. Therefore, that must mean that only white people commit crimes. But that is only because you were in that particular location at that time. That is not because of the fact that you could be in another part of the city, which had Hispanic people or Asian people or African American people who were being incarcerated and they're being sentenced by a judge who possibly looked like them, because she lived and worked in that neighborhood of mostly African American folk. So that is something that I will end with on, that when you oftentimes make your beliefs and you think about something, consider very carefully that your mind has to be sort of like constant vigilance. You have to think about it. Is this something that is a real belief? Is it something that I really believe in? Or is it something that is just not true? And I need to challenge myself on that. And that's why they always say, nobody's perfect. Everybody makes mistakes. And there are always two sides to the story. And you have to consider that two sides of the story. You have to consider both of those sides. You may only be seeing one side of the story, but the other side you have to be able to see also. Well, I think that's pretty much it. I have been able to keep you guys awake for another 25 minutes. So I want to thank you for your attention, and I will see you at the next video.